Hello, my name is Dwayne Covering. I'd like to talk to you about how to create better leadership cultures by focusing on followership. Most recognize we need more and better leadership everywhere, but few understand the countercultural way in which it grows the best, and that is through a genuine focus on good followership. Jesus knew about this strategy. He hinted at it when Pilate goaded him on the night of his trial to respond to his accusers, and then later Pilate kind of threatened him. Don't you know I have power to take your life? Jesus finally responded. And I paraphrase in my own unique way here. Jesus said something like this: if my organization thought about leadership like you and everyone else seems to think about it around here, then my followers would be fighting like mad and clawing and conniving their way to the top like you have. But we don't do it that way in my organization. And a few hours later, Jesus would dramatically and effectively differentiate his leadership from all other would-be powers in the world when he died on a cross to save people, to save individuals who he wanted to follow him. It was the first time that we have a sacrificial God showing himself to be a true leader. After the resurrection, Jesus would formally announce his organization's strategy for growing a culture of leadership. He would say, "Go make disciples." Hardly the vision Rome was trying to fight against. In fact, hardly a vision of global takeover of leadership. Go ye into all the world. Yes, that's visionary. That's big thinking. But make disciples, make followers, hardly the strategy that Rome recognized as a way to motivate success. That's probably why Rome didn't seem much worried at first about this new Christian innovation. Rome ruled with an iron rod, and having more followers, well, that seems like to fit well into Rome's strategy. Christians, make followers. That's great. We'll rule over you. You keep following. So they let Christians grow for a while. Little did they realize, but they eventually did, that this approach, this Christian approach to following and leading, would make obsolete the Roman way of lording it over, of intrigue and cunning and force. This new way of doing leadership would eventually undermine the whole Roman approach to leadership. Jesus' countercultural and counterintuitive way of doing leadership development should not have shocked his Jewish followers had they not become mesmerized by pagan practices. His approach was not new. It was as old as God himself. You see, in this Jewish Christian transition frame, this new idea of God as three in one was powerfully unraveling deep and long trench views of what it meant to be God and what it meant to be a leader. When you call your God Father, it starts rewriting the code language for what it means to be a successful leader. Christianity had rewritten the idea of leadership and Godhead in a Trinitarian concept. An awesome and amazing power of God was demonstrated not by focusing on leadership, but by focusing on followership. The triangle of leadership, Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, soon gave way to the psyches of individuals when they realized that this was not just a triangle of leadership. This is actually more a triangle of followership, because each of them, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, had two committed followers. It was followership that was seen as the new engine of accomplishment. This engine of mutual submission and shared power and authority was something that we see in Genesis. God had originally designed as a gift. He gifted Adam and Eve with this nature. Let us make them, mankind, in our image. In the image of God, he created them male and female. Adam and Eve were given the bodily, social, psychological tools of complementarity to facilitate a mutual submission of two or more individuals that would create a dynamic environment that would foster leadership development. Of course, Genesis 3 tells us that process became disrupted, first by deception and then by lack of courage on Adam's part. After the fall, Jesus tries to salvage this gift, and we often miss the wording of his salvaging attempt. He comes to Eve and he says, your desire will be for your husband and he will rule over you. This passage has gotten vastly distorted over the years, and mainly by bad views of leadership. I believe here Eve was being invited back into the engine of mutuality by her being given a desire for her husband. And her husband was to respond to this, I'm being followed. I better lead better. I better care for this person. The rule here is not one of dominance over, but one of care for. I will take care of you. I am here to lead you, and that means I am the chief servant. I need to serve you. And so this ruling was not the ruling. It was not the ruling that Jesus warned his disciples about. Don't lord it over. Don't rule it over each other like the Gentiles. We don't do it that way. This was a rule of care, a leadership of mutual submission, a point where the leader was the chief servant. He who's greatest among you, let him be the chief servant. So Eve's desire for her husband would lead to his desire to lead by serving her. And this dynamic would take off, and that mutuality would lead a mechanism of leadership development. A feeble illustration I have for people who have a hard time understanding mutual submission is like pedals on a bike. One goes down. If it stays down, you're not going to move. Goes back up. Other one goes down. Back, boom, 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 boom. The faster you do it, more seamless you do it, is the faster your bike moves. So it is with leadership development. Creating a culture of mutual submission creates a faster, dynamic culture of leadership development. Mutual submission is the key here. It creates leadership. It creates leadership. This was the vision of creation. It was also the fundamental plan in the Great Commission. Go make leaders. No, go make disciples. Make followers trained in the Trinitarian method. Every leader, 2 followers, which means if you want to create leaders, you follow. When you follow, you create more leadership, and that dynamic increases. Too easily, unfortunately, our pedals get stuck. Either up or down, they get stuck. And the only way pedals can work is moving up and down. And too often, bikes get stalled, marriages get stalled, organizations get stalled, whole nations get stalled. Right now, as they watch Trump and Pelosi trying to lead the nation, the missing ingredient, I think, is developing a mindset of following. They, with others, are plunging us all headlong in a culture of descent into chaos, or ruled by intrigue, or deception, or ruled by distortion or force. Somehow we have to reboot this and get a culture of following back in to developing the leadership cultures we want. I think understanding this process can do more to rebuild our communities than all the leadership texts and books and tricks and tools and theories and TED lectures out there. But it's a tough call we are making here. We're calling you to follow. We each cringe somewhat at this call. Sounds like we're giving up something. It takes bravery that few have. It takes a desire for the other that few cultivate. No, I'm not talking about mindless obedience or a loyalty oath that leaders require of everybody that works for them. No. That's not how effective followership works. That is blind. And the disciple is not being formed to be able to assist the leader. I'm calling for followership more like what Ira Shaliff champions in his book, The Courageous Follower. Somebody who can stand up for and stand up to a leader, who has in their mind the purpose and focuses on the purpose and reboots leaders when they get off track into that purpose. Let me end with 3 stories to make my point. The first one comes from Isaiah. It's a little verse that says, "The wolf also shall dwell with the lamb, and the leopard shall lie down with the kid, and the calf and the young lion and the fatling together, and a little child shall lead them." Interesting. A little child shall lead them. Many people will immediately recognize this as a utopian context. The wolves, the lambs, yeah, come on, give me a break. The lion? I don't think so. Well, yes, this isn't a utopian context. It's actually the relationships God originally planned. They're equalized, mutualized. There's a culture of sympathetic relationship. The wolves have been tamed and the lambs have been made more courageous. And into that context, leadership can easily grow, so easily grow that even the slightest breeze of a leadership impulse from even a small little child can create leadership dynamics. So the impulse is welcomed, fanned into activity, and everybody rallies around it to create innovation and change. I believe we can move families and organizations towards this, yes, utopian context of mutuality and therefore breed greater leadership. Second, from Jesus himself. Jesus, when he was trudging down the path towards a journey no other leader had ever taken and no other leader could ever take, when he was headed towards the cross, he made this pronouncement a few days before: "My sheep hear my voice and they follow me." What? Really, Jesus? Maybe when Jesus came in at his triumphal entry, it looked like a possibility. But on that night in Pilate, when every disciple fled, this didn't seem to be a very accurate depiction of what was occurring. I had a friend tell me, "Dwayne, if you think you're leading and you're moving ahead and you look around and no one is following you, then Dwayne, you're not leading. You're just out for a walk." And for all the evidence of that day, it looked like Jesus was out for a walk. But it was a walk of his life. Down the Via Dolorosa he walked, believing people would follow such an approach to leadership. And he was right. Many have. I have. And millions of others will do likewise. Lest you think that this appeal to followership is merely a religious call or a religious idea, let me back up and finalize with one other story. It comes from a leader by the name of Wag Dodge. In 1949, he led a group of young firemen, smoke jumpers, into a fight against a hot August fire in Man Gulch in Montana. Norman MacLean documents this story vividly in his book, Young Men and Fire. Fascinating book. I highly recommend it. When the fire turned on the firefighting crew, Wag Dodge, who had more experience than all the younger kids, most of them were teens or early 20s, Wag Dodge realized they could not outrun the flames. He was older, had more experience, and he learned the power of fire. And he moved ahead of them and lit a match and threw it on the ground to start a fire around him on the parts that had not been burned. And he waved his young crew into this pit of smoke. They seemed to look in dismay. They would have none of it. This was too crazy. They were young. They knew how to run faster than Wag, and they would outrun it. And so they did. Ran past him up the hill, a steep hill. Only 2 made it. 13 of them died. They didn't have a chance going up the hill against the flames that were coming at them. And when they got there, even those who got to the top couldn't get through some of the crags and died. Only 2 of them found a route through. Following is not just a spiritual thing. It's hard work. It's figuring out how to help a leader lead and reprimanding them when they're not. It's courageously following and sacrificing, and at the same time encouraging and even challenging. I feel that the only way to really get the leadership development most of our organizations want is to get into Irish Alepht's thinking and develop followership. Develop it in a way that it can stand up for and to leaders. And it's not just for Christians, and it's not just for religious people to get into this mindset. I believe it's fundamental to the Godhead, fundamental to our understanding of Trinitarian dynamics, fundamental to our flattening of this relationship between male and female that has so dogged Christianity and many world religions, and the liberation of women to follow, yes, to follow, but also to lead, and to follow, and lead, and follow, and lead. So when Jesus had such a strong belief in his leadership on that day he was dying, when he said, "My sheep hear my voice and they follow me," he was setting in motion the true dynamics of a leadership culture. I hope you can embrace that. I hope you can find your calling and following. Thank you.